Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Renee Mehrra, and today I am talking to Dr. Teresa Joseph. She's an associate professor in political science at Alphonsa College and also the director for Gandhian studies at Alphonsa College in Pala, Kerala in India. Dr. Teresa Joseph has written 2 books. We're going to be talking about this latest book that she's come out with, Mahatma Gandhi and Mass Media, Mediating Conflict and Social Change, as well as Reporting Nuclear Pakistan Security, Perceptions, and the Indian Press. She also has co-edited 2 books, Deliberative Democracy, Understanding the Indian Experience and Resolution in South Asia. Dr. Joseph has written several articles on politics, international relations, mass media, as well as on Mahatma Gandhi, when the latest book is out there, out from Routledge. Thank you so much, Dr. Teresa Joseph, for joining us from Kerala, India, and telling us about your latest book. We all know about Mahatma Gandhi, the father of the Indian nation, who pioneered the nonviolent movement. But we also want to know about Mahatma Gandhi, the persuasive mass communicator who used his journalistic skills to amplify his message of nonviolence. So share with us, first of all, the genesis of this book.
Okay. Dr. Renee, thank you so much for having me here on this program. To share the genesis of the book. Actually, my formal education, my formal training is in international relations. I had my MA, MPhil, and PhD doctoral degrees in international relations. So, and within that, I was actually interested in media studies. So I had done some work on Indian press coverage of the Kashmir issue, on international media coverage of international conflict and other issues. And basically my book on reporting nuclear Pakistan. So that's, I discuss, in the book I discuss how the Indian press covers Pakistan and specifically Pakistan's nuclear program. Now, in all these works, I had also done some work on gender and militarism and the media. So with all these works, studies on the media, it was not actually a very positive findings. The findings were not really positive, in the sense that I found that the media was in no way actually facilitating any kind of peace, in particularly when you take the subcontinent, South Asia, where it's all a question of perceptions and internalization of images and so on, where the media could actually play a very good role, but in changing perceptions. But I find that in all these works, I found that there's a more of a kind of sustaining the mainstream, the dominant discourse on demonization of enemies, even the international media coverage of conflict. So those were my a lot of my initial years of study were in that process. And it was over recently that actually I got to read more on Mahatma Gandhi. And then I realized that, as you mentioned, Gandhi has been studied extensively. But as I read more about him, I was more interested. I became really interested in how he engaged with the mass media. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I got about writing this book, because I realized that there is an alternative to how we can engage with the media, how the media can engage with conflict. And Gandhi shows us the way. So that is something that is how actually the book originated, to put it briefly.
Yeah, and so share with us a brief historical, going back to the late 1880s when Mahatma Gandhi was in London, and then he joined the Vegetarian Society, and he started writing, and then he went to South Africa, and and then going back to India, then those 4 papers, the Navjivan, the Harijan, the Young India. All that came into being, and how he actually used them very beautifully, strategically, to get his message across, not just in India, but also in the United States or UK or around the world. And we're talking about the time when there was no radio, there was no social media, just, articles and journals and newspapers, and to amplify your message. I think it's an amazing legacy that Mahatma Gandhi leaves us. So share with us that brief historical from that time onwards.
Yeah, sure. I'll take off from where you ended. It's really surprising that at a time when there was no social media or the internet as we know it today, that Mahatma Gandhi was able to become such an important person all over the world. So it was not only because of the message that he tried to put across, but also the way that the medium that he used. So as you asked me about a brief history, we know that Gandhi went to London for his higher education. And when he was in London, he came into contact with the Vegetarian Society. He joined the Vegetarian Society, and for a period of time, he was even the editor of their magazine, The Vegetarian. So his initial entry into journalism started with a series of articles in The Vegetarian. Now, this was about the food and culture and festivals of India. And he placed, especially food and festivals, he placed it in the context of the religion and culture of India. So basically, he was trying to change the existing preconceived notions of Indian society. So this was written at a time when he was barely 21 years of age. So if you look at those articles, you will, I was personally astounded by the kind of sharpness and his kind of observation and how he was able to put across his ideas. And another thing to keep in mind was he writes in his autobiography that until he came to London, he had actually never even read a newspaper. But when he came to London, he started reading the newspaper, of course, for language purposes. But later on, he came to understand how the newspaper could be used. Then after that initial entry into journalism, he came back to India, and of course, he moved on to South Africa in 1893. And in South Africa, it's interesting that the very day after he reached South Africa and he entered the magistrate's court, he had a turban on. So, and the magistrate asked him to remove it, and he refused, and he walked out of the court. And the next day, the Natal Advertiser, the newspaper, a leading local newspaper, reported very negatively about it, saying with the headline, "An unwelcome visitor." Of course, that was Gandhi. And so it was a very negative report. And Gandhi immediately wrote a letter to the editor explaining that while the European tradition was to remove your headdress, in India it was the reverse. To show your respect, you keep your headgear on. So that was actually published on the 4th day that after Gandhi reached South Africa. And then you find that he starts off with a series of writing letters to the press. He read the press, daily newspapers meticulously, and he kept writing letters specifically to remove any kind of misperceptions or misconceptions. And particularly, we have the press, white-dominated press, which was very discriminatory. So to address that kind of discrimination against the Indian community, he started writing letters, and slowly he moved on to writing articles for newspapers. And in fact, he got the attention even of the New York Times, the Times of London, and so on. But after a point of time, the press, of course, it's a white-dominated press, and they were not so forthcoming in accepting his articles. In fact, one editor asked him to put it as an advertisement. So then he realized he needed his own, some kind of mechanism. So the Natal Indian Congress had been formed at that time, and they were looking to start a newspaper. And Gandhi also made his personal efforts. And with the help of Mansuklal Nasser, who was a member of the Natal Indian Congress, he came forward with this idea of starting the International Printing Press. Mm-hmm. And soon after, he started the newspaper, The Indian Opinion, with the help of Gandhi. Gandhi helped with financially, as well as he was writing in every issue of Indian Opinion. So basically, Indian Opinion, as Gandhi saw it, the objectives were to build bridges between the Indian community and the white community in South Africa, as well as with the British Empire, and to build bridges within the Indian community in South Africa. And interestingly, another point was also to address the problems within the Indian community. There was this basic problem of the discrimination. One major factor was the lack of sanitation. So Gandhi used Indian opinion to generate awareness on such issues also, to create awareness on various issues among the Indian community. So, and of course, as we move on, we find he using the Indian opinion in his satyagraha in South Africa. He used it against the Indian franchise bill. And so the Indian opinion was very much a part of Gandhi's life. 21 years he spent in South Africa. And in his fight against racism, struggles against racism and so on, Indian opinion was very much a partner in that, in the path that he tread in South Africa. And we find that in 1915, when he returned to India, he had much more experience with the press, of course. And again, he started writing articles and letters in the Indian press. And here again, we find that it is a white-dominated press. But here, there is an alternative press also. There are a lot of freedom, people in the freedom movement who were working as journalists or had started their newspapers and so on. But when Gandhi came onto the scene, when he took leadership of the freedom movement, we find that the journalism in India received a real fillip with Gandhi entering the movement. And in 1919, the owners of the publishers of Navajivan and Young India, they offered him the job as editor because the existing editor had been deported to London. So Horniman was deported to London and Gandhi was asked to take over. So Gandhi happily accepted it because he wanted, as he used in Indian opinion in South Africa, he needed some instrument to convey his message, instrument of his own, without relying on other. So that is how he became the editor of Young India and Navajivan. Now, Young India was in English. It was targeted at an all India audience, whereas Navajivan was in Gujarati and targeted at a Gujarati audience. And both these newspapers were, of course, aimed at mobilizing the people against the empire and in favor for the freedom struggle, as well as generating ideas of Gandhi's notion of a new India, of what the future India should be like. And so it was not only political, but also socio-economic objectives. And later on, we find in when he was in Yerwada jail, he started the last newspaper, that is the Harijan. Harijan was in three, actually, in Hindi, Gujarati, and English. So Harijan was, of course, interestingly, it was started when he was in prison. He was started with the financial support of G.D. Birla, and it was aimed at the promoting the interests of the backward communities in India. So that would be a very brief overview of, as you suggested, from the late 19th century to going through all his newspapers very briefly.
And even when he was in jail, he was writing and always connected with his readers, and also many times a critic of himself, you know. And I think that is something, you know, one can really emulate, because he called the press as the fourth estate, and he said anytime he abused the power of the pen is criminal. So he was reinforcing ethics and journalism, especially now when we look at it, it has a lot of meaningful relevance. We look many times it's fake news or sensationalism or bias. This really brings us back to the center. You know, we talk about the idealistic, journalistic views of Mahatma Gandhi, and I think they're very, very meaningful and relevant in our modern day times. So your book really brings back to the present. If Mahatma Gandhi was, you know, in our present day times, how he would have used beautifully the social media platform, but upholding the truth and the facts. So yes. I think that is a very strong message this book can give us.
Yes. So actually going back to his self-criticism, in his newspapers, he encouraged the editors or whoever's in charge of the letter to the editor column to publish letters which were critical of him rather than those which were, praising his work or anything. And in fact, we find Jamnalaj Bajaj is supposed to have told him that why do you give so much space to your critics rather than those who are supporting you? And he says, I'd like to learn from my critics. I'd like to learn from those who are not converted, or I'd like to learn from my critics what I need to, where I need to change, what I need to do. So that is something important that the press can learn. And of course, when we look at learning from Gandhi's journalism, of course, particularly in the context of fake news, he was very, very particular that maintaining the truth in all his reportings. And he would tell all his reporters, if you cannot verify something, don't report it. He was very specific about it. So there are a lot of instances when where he advises youngsters, journalists within his own media system, or even editors he's called for inaugurations and all that, where he talks about maintaining the facts, sticking to the truth, and particularly he talks about how to write. He talks about sober reasoning, that you don't need to go into sensationalism, that exaggeration, it will be at the cost of facts. So truth, sober reasoning, non-violence. Of course, he's written a lot about non-violence. And most importantly, in my context of the book, is that it's all about bridge building. Of course, we know that Gandhi said he never had enemies. He had adversaries, and he said we know that he had a lot of friends who were from European friends. So he fought the empire, not the people of Britain. So his whole, the way I look at it, how he has used the media in addressing conflict, it is never about getting the upper hand with the adversary. It's about understanding his, whether it was Satyagraha in South Africa, or whether it was all the different movements in India, or the different struggles against the empire in India. It was all, his journals, his publications were an open book. All the strategies, all the plans of the movement were very expressly placed in the book and in the newspapers, which were open to be read by the authorities also. So he was very specific about being open, about his newspapers were for bridge building, and he tried to keep the channels of communication open. He used the newspapers as a kind of bridge building to communicate and to educate the people about Satyagraha. For instance, when he talks about the franchise bill, fighting against the franchise bill, or the Asiatic the Registration Act, he's encouraging everyone to boycott the process of registration, but he also advises them no using violence. And if anyone insisted on registering, the volunteers were supposed to help them to register, in fact. So he gives a lot of lessons through his writings and how to promote understanding between communities. Of course, he's written a lot on communal harmony, and he was extremely, particularly in the later years, in the 1940s, he was extremely despondent about the way the Indian press was handling the communal issues that were taking place, the communal violence. And in fact, in the late 1940s, he talks about the newspaperman being a walking plague. And he even talks about, at one particular time, he talks about that if he was made dictator for a day, he would ban newspapers. That was how desperate he felt because of the way the press was handling communal issues. So self-restraint, I would say self-restraint, sober reasoning, his truth, and of course, freedom of the press. He stood very strongly for freedom of the press. And although I went through a very brief, broad outline, we can see how he, whether it was in South Africa or India, a lot of restrictions were brought in, particularly India. We had censorship, whether it was open, overt or covert kind of censorship. But Gandhi had his own way of addressing it. He was not ready to accede to any kind of censorship in his newspapers, or to, at certain points of time, newspapers had to put forth securities to get published. He refused to pay any kind of security. So he was ready to court arrest. We know that he was arrested he was charged on sedition charges. He was arrested on sedition charges, and he was in jail for 2 years for having written 3 articles in Young India and against the empire. And of course, that resulted in the great trial, which was, of course, very famous. And so he courted arrest. He even started his unregistered newspaper after the Salt March, of course, was a major publicity, something that really garnered a lot of publicity. But after that, the press was really clamped down on. But even though Gandhi suspended, every time when it came to that point, he would suspend his newspapers rather than give in to the authorities. And at that point of time, he started an unregistered newspaper, Satyagrahi. I didn't mention that earlier because it was a short-term newspaper kind of. It was his it was his alternative way of fighting the system. So he stood very strongly for freedom of the press, and he did not advocate any kind of control over the press. What he felt was, but he was okay with some kind of internal, some kind of self-regulation. He was talking particularly about the press association or something like that, but never about the authorities or the government or any kind of external control over the press. He fought against very strongly. And another point also is how he discreetly made use of the press. Like in my book, I go through historically how he covered different issues or different movements during the freedom struggle. And you find that he does not address every issue the same way. It was not a question of getting publicity for publicity's sake. For some issues like the the Champaran Satyagraha or the Ahmedabad mill workers strike, he particularly requested the editors not to send their reporters, that at this point of time, the issues were sensitive and did not require media coverage. Whereas when it came to the Keda Satyagraha, of course, civil disobedience, non-cooperation, all that, Vaikam Satyagraha, all that, he tried to get maximum publicity. So he made a very, as you mentioned the word earlier, he made a very strategic use of the media in his movement. And his media ethics, that would be I would include it in his media ethics. The readiness for self-criticism, the importance he gave to the freedom of the press, but most importantly, of course, the emphasis he placed on truth, on maintaining the truth in all reporting. So, and I think even people like Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, who worked with him in his newspaper, says that that is one of his lasting legacies, that the kind of media ethics that he has inculcated in those who worked with him. The ethics, particularly in today's context of fake news or hate speech and all that, there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from Gandhi. Even his style of communication, the non-violent communication, as some people would refer to it.
I think his style and his philosophy of how he used the press and, saying upholding the truth, disseminating information by upholding the truth, and most importantly, it should serve the public. And I think that's a very important facet that we should bring out, especially in today's times when we're talking about the media and we're talking about the press and how media can really come in and mediate conflict. So there's a lot to be learned.
There's actually one
as well,
Yes, there's one important thing is that the whole thing, how he saw journalism, he specifically mentions in his autobiography and so on, that there are some professions which need to be seen as a mission. So he considered journalism to be a mission.
Yes.
And another thing about his newspapers, when you talk about ethics as a publisher also, he never accepted advertisements. I mean, Indian Opinion in the beginning accepted advertisements, but later on he stopped that.
Because
so it was not for profit.
So he said you can have advertisement, he said it earlier, but it should not come and interfere in your content of whatever you're writing.
Yes, that's in the initial stages of Indian Opinion, but later on he stopped advertisements completely. In between, he continued just for advertisements for books or So things which he thought were useful, but then at a point of time, it became difficult to make a distinction between what is useful and what is not, and he stopped advertising completely. In Indian newspapers, when he came to India, the publishers were ready to agree with him about not accepting newspapers. So profit was secondary. I mean, profit was definitely not part of it. Was a Journalism was a mission for him.
Absolutely. Coming back to your, as the director of the Center for Gandhian Studies in Pala, Kerala, Gandhi believed in rural development a lot, and I think your center also brings about a lot of attention towards rural development.
Yes. So the center, we've started it in 2008, and we have a lot of activities. Of course, we have a lot of academic programs like lectures, webinars, seminars, and so workshops and so on. But yes, we do focus on, notwithstanding the COVID times, we do focus on the rural community, the panchayats, and particularly women in these areas. So something that we've been doing is having awareness programs in different panchayats, and taking up issues like awareness on environment, on nutrition, and political awareness, and different kinds of awareness programs we have. We also publish small booklets, like we have booklets on the problems of using plastic, in Malayalam, which is, I'm talking about in Panchayat, the audience, the target audience are the ordinary women of Panchayat who work on daily wages, and so we have a one-day program. So these booklets are basic booklets on problems of Panchayat, on problems of plastic, on alcoholism, on waste management, how you can manage your waste, on nature, living with nature, nature cure. So on Right to Information Act, how you can access the right to information. So these are some of the booklets that we distribute to the people when we go to the rural areas for these programs. And one step, as you can see here, that's the newsletter actually of the center, which brings together all the activities of the center. We do jail visits. We visit the jail for, we contribute books to the jail library. The students, we have a group of students that's the Gandhi Forum, who actually spearhead all the activities of the center. So we also hold exhibitions and so on. The basic objective being to promote an understanding not only of Mahatma Gandhi, but also the ideals and values that he stood for. So it is in that context that we do these programs in the rural areas, panchayats and so on.
It's good you're trying to bring some transformation there as well. And
yes,
that's very
yes.
important. Any other book coming from your side?
Not immediately, thinking about it.
Okay, all right. And what is your vision for the Gandhian Studies, the Center for Gandhian Studies, as the director?
Yeah, okay, we'd like to go and have more publications. Actually, some of the seminars that we've done, we've also brought them out as book. Another book has been published by Routledge also. That is a part of the seminars that we've done. So, so it's actually two-pronged what we are doing. On one hand, we do a lot of academic work, and so we'd like to strengthen that part. And also the community service, that is, we see it as a kind of service learning experience where the students, it's not just about transforming society, it's also about student learning experience for the students themselves also. So we'd like to strengthen that also, the community service extension programs. Of course, the COVID has been last 2 years, such kind of service extension programs, community programs have not been possible. We did do the jail visits, but we would like to strengthen those kind of programs. Ultimately, like Gandhi spoke about, he saw education as drawing out the best in the child and man, both body, mind, and spirit. So an all-round building up. So that is what we are kind of looking at, both among the students, the academic community, and the public. So I think the 2 years of COVID, we've been a little silent. So we would like to come back much stronger.
Thank you very much, Dr. Teresa Joseph, the director for the Center for Gandhian Studies in Pala, Kerala, as well as the associate professor of political science and author of the latest book, Mahatma Gandhi and Mass Media, Mediating Conflict and Social Change. Thank you very much, Dr. Teresa Joseph, and I'm Dr. Renee Mehrra. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy, stay positive.